All right, welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. Been away for a little bit. Basically, the podcast was starting to consume a lot of time. Let me explain it real quickly, then we'll get on to it with Neil Cohen. We're going to have a little bit of fun here. I do have a day job, people. Nuzzle.com, Nuzzle.com. Check it out if you haven't. It's very cool, but the podcast was growing in popularity. That started to lead to people really wanting to be on the podcast, which was fantastic, but started to take a bit more time than maybe a person with a full-time job has available. And so we're gonna get back going here again, but I'm gonna maybe try to focus on doing a couple of them every month. Why don't we call it the first Tuesday and the third Tuesday, so you can plan, so you can mark your calendars. Welcome back. We're going to start off this year, this first Tuesday in February, talking to Neil Cohen. We made some predictions last year, beginning of the year. Who cares what happened to him? We were probably right about everything. We were talking about cryptocurrency and the fact that there's now a blockchain application for people booking themselves into hair salons, and we thought, gee, that sounds a little funny, a little bit like a bubble. That got us thinking about all the sort of funny bubbles that have come and gone in the world of internet technology, or come and gone and come back again with gusto. And so we thought we'd sit down, open up the microphones, and talk about it a little bit. So here's my conversation with Neil Cohen, having some fun, talking about the history of internet fads and bubbles. This is the Something Venture podcast. Good to have you back. All right, welcome back. This is the Something Venture podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today, Neil Cohen. How are you doing?
Hi, Kent. How are you? Happy 2018.
Thank you. Welcome back. In this podcast, I explore the reality behind the Silicon Valley headlines as I sit down with the people who are shaping the way we view the world online and beyond. Man, that takes a long time to say. I've shortened that thing, and I've shortened that thing. It takes a long time to say.
But it's important. I mean, we have to know why we're here.
Yeah, I got to get a celebrity or somebody to do it, like to do one for me. You know, like, you don't do your own intro. If you're like a guy, you don't do your own intro. Well, I guess I'm not a thing yet. But
it would be great if you can get like announcer man type, like from like Wheel of Fortune or something like that, to add a little sizzle to the opening of the show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we did a podcast at the beginning of 2017 where we did predictions for 2017. And there's absolutely no percentage in going back and reviewing how you did on predictions.
Well, I think the one big one that I'm kind of excited about is, remember, voice is the new touch. And look what's happening. We talk to everything now except to each other. Yeah,
exactly. Well, I think we also predicted all 14 hurricanes correctly, probably. I don't want to go back, but I assume we predicted them correctly. I assume we got Bitcoin's price exactly right. We said 18,000 by the end of the year, probably, something like that.
I think as far as I'm concerned, we nailed it all.
Excellent. All right, so I thought we would go back and have some fun this time. We've got some serious podcasts coming up, some interesting things have been happening in Silicon Valley. But here, as we sit in 2018, and the blockchain and Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies have become the, it depends on your point of view, the fad du jour, the future, the way to get rich, the way to get poor. We thought we'd go back and review Silicon Valley's rich and entertaining history of fads, some of which worked and some of which didn't.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the things that always fascinates me, especially, since marketing is my core focus, is the hype cycle that is generated around a particular technology at any point in time. And I think we were talking about a week ago, I sent you a little cartoon about two people talking, where should we focus this year? Blockchain. It's changing everything. Yeah. We're all talking about it. We don't want to be left behind. And the person says, what is blockchain? And the guy responds, also, artificial intelligence.
And also machine learning.
Oh, machine learning.
Yeah, exactly.
And don't forget.
Hey, I can frame this another way, too. As we sit here, recently, the company WAG...
don't even start.
One of the things we make fun of is Pets.com, ridiculous, bought a Super Bowl ad famously to sell pet food at 30% less than it cost them to probably make the stuff, much less ship it. And now WAG is a apparently wildly profitable company providing services to people and their pets.
It's a unicorn of all unicorns. You know, and look, this is one of the things I would joke around all the time is like, is there another first world problem any worse than excess dog walking capacity?
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm fortunate to work with a lot of accelerators around the world, you know, that are trying to solve some real human problems, like we don't have water, or we, all the pests are eating our crops. And, and you come back to a $1 billion plus valuation on WAG, and it's a head shaker, which is other thing that started us on this conversation, which is like let's go back to 1995 and where it all started in some ways, and reminisce.
Well, and that is kind of the joke about Silicon Valley is, you know, unfortunately, there's a preponderance of kind of young men in Silicon Valley, so you get music discovery app number 4,000 before you get somebody building, you know, a diabetes health state management app, because 23-year-old dudes tend not to have diabetes or health states that concern them, but you know, they need their music recommendations, and so you get an excess of that kind of stuff.
Well, what's more important than on-demand Haagen-Dazs ice cream?
That was Cosmo.com back in the day.
Cosmo.com, you know, I remember very much. So, you know, you think back, and we're at one of the startups. I was at one of the trends, B2B exchanges, back in 96, 97. We were one of the first B2B exchanges at adauction.com, right? But I remember, oh my God, Cosmo, they're going to bike over, like, so what do you want? And everybody was ordering the most extraordinarily stupid thing that I need a frozen Snickers bar.
Yeah, because you could.
Because you could.
By the way, that fad has been mirrored recently. There's been a big trend toward, like, caviar is one of them, like these online delivery services.
Well, Uber Eats. It's every day. I mean, people are getting McDonald's. So, you know, and again, everything old is new again. Yeah. So we went from Cosmo, which was this purpose-built thing just for biking over food for startup people, to Uber Eats, where you can now order McDonald's and have it brought over to your home.
Right.
And wow.
Well, I was proposing an idea to a millennial who seemed to have no real sense of humor or irony. And it was sort of like, you know, I had an idea for this service, and I could actually, you know, give him the number, but that it was a service where you would call and you'd order a pizza and somebody would deliver it to you. And it was like a voice enabled. Like, you would call them on the phone and you'd order pizza and deliver it to them. It was like, what the hell's that? I'm like, Domino's. It's been around for like 25 years. So, everything is old is new again. All right, want to go through what do we take some of these in historical order, or?
Well, you know, I think what's interesting is you could go back to where it started with browsers, right? And Netscape.
Yep.
And maybe the real deal, right?
Yep.
You know, the first browser comes out, and holy smokes, look at this thing that's here.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things Mark Andreessen says this is like, look, technologies come out that he knows are going to be transformative. Like, say the internet, maybe the blockchain, who knows? Right. But that doesn't mean that it's going to happen this year or next year. It could happen in 10 years. And it doesn't mean that, like, the most obvious application is what's going to be the thing that happens. So, for example, when GPS-enabled phones come out, you know, where you can have Google Maps, you can locate yourself everywhere. Maybe check-ins is the future, right? Maybe being mayor of your local store is the future. Or maybe in 2 years, it's that you put that together with people in their own cars trying to make a living, and it's Uber. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. Mm-hmm. And you didn't guess it was going to be a gypsy cab company that became the most valuable thing in the world, because check-ins seem kind of obvious. Now, in retrospect, Uber's really obvious. So in all of these kind of ridiculous trends, sometimes there's something in there that emerges.
In aggregate, hopefully you learn from some of these launches and mistakes. Yeah. One is that you can't run, let's say, you know, a Cosmo or a web van, and spend, you know, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of $1 million in infrastructure,
Right.
With a structural loss built into the
Right.
company.
Right.
So that at least we figured that out early.
Right.
But what I think is interesting is that if you start with browsers, and I remember because I was working at a big company then, I was at Sega,
Yeah.
and you kind of look at this thing and you go like, what does this mean? And you had chat threads and
Yep.
open conversation. It was just this Wild West atmosphere out there, and then you move into the portal stage,
Yep.
where Excite and Yahoo come out, and I guess everybody thought that you needed 40 portals.
Yep.
Because then we had, can you name all of them? Can you name, remember Alta Vista?
Yeah.
You can remember Ask Jeeves.
Right.
You can remember, you can start going down the list. It's
Right.
like, oh my God, how many of them were there?
Yeah.
And what were people thinking when they said, like, well, we need this many portals, and I'm going to throw $50 million at this thing.
Exactly. Well, but then you look at take search engines. I recently saw an interview with Steve Jurvetson, who sat next to Larry or Sergey or one of the founders of Google on an airplane and gets really excited. He gets excited about the guy, gets excited about their story, takes it to his partnership, and they say, do we really need another search engine? And they already had 6 in their portfolio, and there were 40 spread across the portfolios of Silicon Valley. So in a world where Ask Jeeves is kind of ridiculous and all that, there was still a Google sitting out there for somebody to invest in.
Yeah, but I think what Google was doing, and again, I'm not even close to being as brilliant as these guys are, is they looked at search from a different perspective, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Search, because if we go back to portals, search was completely different than search is now.
Yeah.
I mean, and the value of intent-driven search had not been created yet, right?
Yeah.
Because it was more of a gee whiz. It was like, hey, let's search our name.
Yeah, right.
Oh, who is president? Who is Secretary of State under Millard Fillmore?
Yeah, exactly.
Ooh, like that. It's a little bit different now, and I think they had that vision, and I don't think that vision was there with Yahoo, Excite, Alta Vista, all those other kind of. I mean, the search was great, but I don't think anybody was using it because what we look for now wasn't there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and arguably, I mean, I can't remember exactly the history of Google, but as I recall, people have told me that they weren't the only ones doing that method. There was the Yahoo method that everyone now thinks is ridiculous, which was they had a bunch of people searching the web and categorizing things.
Right.
And then Google comes up with its backlink thing. My understanding was a few people were doing that. Then Google had the extra gimmick, or they stood out at the time because they took all the crap off the homepage. Mm-hmm. So the homepage used to have ads and banners, and they had this.
That was the portal thing.
Yeah.
It's like, you have to be this destination for somebody. The first place they go in the morning when they wake up, it's got your weather, it's got your news,
Right.
it's got your stock prices, because you want that all in one place every day. The first thing you click on when you came to the internet. And at the time, they said like, oh yeah, this is going to replace your daily newspaper, and so there were certain things that were correct about that.
Yeah.
Just the form factor was wrong.
And then you kind of realize it's not really that hard to move from one web page to another.
Well,
like the value of putting it all together is like, okay.
Well, it's so funny too, because when I go home and to see my parents, and my mom still got like Yahoo as her home destination page, and that portal set up, and you go to it, and my mind explodes that it hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed
since 1999.
I just use it. I use it to try to look at stock prices, because the Yahoo Finance actually was historically pretty good. And I go, and it's weird. It's like this dying, because it's still there. I think hundreds of millions of people still kind of go to it, but it's just dying. Like things will just be broken. You'll click on something, and the last story is from like 18 years ago. It's so weird, but it's still there. Like they didn't just turn it off.
No, yeah, and they've got some valuable properties. But what interestingly happened is after that, you started to get some people trying to extract value out of the net, and that's when B2B exchanges started. I remember Chemdex.
Yep.
I was at Ad Auction, but like all of these industry specific vertical exchanges came out to kind of reduce the friction in the supply chain,
Right.
A more efficient bidding and buying process. I think you had the home deliveries started popping up,
Yep.
so a long time ago. Now it's back again, and auctions. Remember, auctions started. So that was the birth of eBay on sale. Remember on sale, which was the first clearance for electronics, consumer electronics.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and they went public on that in a very short period of time, and they were a Goliath at the time. They were, as a matter of fact, as I recall, they were in the early days of e-commerce. It was like them and eBay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and here's the kind of, as you look back and you try to learn, like, what's the lesson now as things emerge today. If you had bought stock in that company and in Pets.com and in WebEx and in Amazon and held them all for 20 years, you'd be the richest guy in town.
Well,
and like your Pets, you're right. Your Pets.com would be worthless, but your Amazon investment would be worth hundreds of times what you paid for it.
But it's funny if you look back at and again, e-commerce started off hot then with Amazon and Pets and some of the others with tons and tons of investment, and how many of them are still there.
Yep.
And I think again, you have the hype versus the promise, right?
Yeah.
And the hype was, oh my God, you could create a business model out of shipping 50-pound bags of pet food at a loss, versus what was learned from that, which is merchandising, customer journey, friction. How do you reduce friction?
Yep.
How do you leverage data?
Yep.
And who learned from that?
Yeah.
Well, that's why Walmart set up, Walmart.com down the block, and Target set up, So I think all the refugees probably went there.
Yeah.
And then how many successful e-commerce sites can you name right now that are independent of a major retailer?
Yeah. Well, and Jeff Bezos, when he started, his idea was, okay, he didn't care particularly about books. He said, what can I sell that I can ship that doesn't spoil, that has a really high value to weight ratio? And I think he narrowed it down to books and garden tools. I guess garden tools are actually pretty expensive and they ship pretty well and all that. And he picked books. So dog food, something that spoils, is heavy and is cheap, is like, it's almost like you're just like punking the venture capitalists.
But remember,
at that point.
It's because pets can't drive.
Their commercials were pretty funny. Hey, you remember Pets.com? You don't remember all the other ones.
Well, but you think about, again, we're talking about the hype factor versus the reality, and then you look at something like Webvan, which is. So look at Webvan versus Amazon, because both companies had to invest heavily in infrastructure and early on, right?
Yeah.
But Webvan, was all about the distribution of supermarket, like supermarket shopping online. So again, way ahead of its time.
Right.
Like I said, when I was at adauction.com, way ahead, I said bleeding edge versus leading edge, right? Like you create something that makes a whole hell of a lot of sense, but the market isn't ready for it. Yeah. So at that point in time, for adauction.com, people weren't ready to put their advertising inventory in somebody else's hands or to sell it in an independent marketplace. Now, called programmatic buying. It's the industry standard. It's all data driven, and we were trying to do that 10 years before the market was ready for it. Webvan, again, 15 years before the market was ready for it. Even now, people do online grocery shopping, but it's mostly things they reorder, like toilet paper or dog biscuits or something like that. But if you look at Webvan, they're trying to build this infrastructure. Now you come 15 years forward, and what's Amazon doing? It's like, look, we're not going to build that infrastructure.
Yeah.
We're just going to go buy Whole Foods.
Yeah, right.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they buy Target in the near-term future, and then you've got that quinella that you need. You got your hard goods and your fresh goods all in one thing, and you've got distribution points, everywhere, and ease of delivery, and you reduce, like I said, that friction. But Webvan looked, when the investment was going, oh, this makes perfect sense. We're going to build purpose-built infrastructure for delivering stuff from custom facilities that cost billions of dollars.
Right, and there's a lot of problems that technology doesn't solve. Like, in my opinion, if you go to one of those online things, you try to order groceries online, it's a pain in the ass. It is not better than just walking into a store, walking up and down the aisles, going, "Oh yeah, I forgot I need that thing." By the time you forget to order peanut butter on your online store, it's just not a big problem. And the current version of this is Soylent, which is this Pediasure for millennials. And so it's basically the stuff that you drink because you're too busy to eat. So nobody's too busy to eat.
And is it lost on? Is it just? I mean, we know Soylent, from the movie.
Yeah.
Do you think
first of all,
why would you call your product something?
Yeah, I don't know
because it's people.
I don't know how it's people. I don't know how that name got by anybody. For starters, I don't know how it's lost on anybody. That's just like that stuff that you drink when you can't eat solid food. Like, it's not a good state to be in. It is not a healthy state. When you're drinking something instead of eating solid food, it's usually because something's gone horribly wrong with your health.
And by the way, for the millennial listeners out there right now, yes, this is two older guys fetching about young people doing silly things, right?
Some things really are ridiculous.
Oh, yeah, but again, it's you've got Soylent. Another answer to that, and this is a little bit past millennials, but is the meal kits, which was this idea that people are so busy, we've got to do a paint by numbers, assembly kit for people to make them feel like they're cooking at home,
right?
And how many of them are there? Right? Look, we're going 20 years forward from where we were a few seconds ago, but the principle is the same. Is you get this hype factor in, so like it's not just Blue Apron, but it's like HelloFresh and Freshly, and everybody's got a different idea for pre-portioned food packs,
right?
And yet, what's the market for more than three of them, right? That maybe take a different tact or a different direction, and people are going, I don't know what it is, and the market is so saturated, and there are going to be a lot of companies out there that are going out of business. So I don't understand the hype cycle that makes investors look at this thing as like, well, there's 6 of them out there, so we're going to be the 7th.
Well, it's because Google was the 7th, and Facebook was the 100th. It's not the first one. It's there were 100 versions of Facebook by the time Facebook came out. But if you invested in that, your yacht's parking next to the other yachts, and
but you know this firsthand, and for those of us who may not know, Kent was at Friendster with his current business partner Jonathan, and Jonathan created the first social network, real social network, but again, bleeding edge versus leading edge. I mean, at the time, you guys did not know you were inventing weaponized AI against ourselves.
Yeah, we could raise money for that.
Yeah, right. But it was such a simple idea back then, and look at what it's the unintended consequences, right? But it was a little bit ahead of its time.
Yeah. Well, it was barely ahead. I mean, the thing that. The technology that came to the fore that really made social networks take off, and it was happening at that time, was the emergence of photography on the phone, digital photographs. So people suddenly had this huge amount of digital content, pictures of them and their friends that they took on their phone, and then the social networks were the place that they got uploaded. So those two technologies came along about the same time, just as... Uber couldn't happen until you could take a credit card on a mobile app, and your mobile app had a map of the world, and a couple pieces have to fall into place, and then how they get exploited. But should we are we still in the 90s? Like, we haven't left the 90s yet. So what do we make fun of at the end of the 90s? And they're all back now.
And I'm guilty as charged. The rise of the incubator. So Idealab was
yeah.
a big success.
Incubators.
And then everybody said, "Oh, we can do that too."
Oh my God, they're the worst.
Okay, and so from companies, right?
Yeah.
I was at Camp 6. We created that.
Lord.
There was a host of others, but I think the hubris behind the whole incubator was like, oh well, if Bill Gross can create
It's
like
ridiculous.
super value and have a multi-billion-dollar market cap, we can do that too.
Yeah,
and you had some smart people thinking that they could crank out companies from those things.
And incubators. So so first of all, if you're in an incubator, your health state is also not good. Like incubators are for babies that aren't doing super well, like little chicks that aren't like ready to make their way in the world. But the backstory of any successful company includes an incubator. Never.
Like
Jeff Bezos. Yeah, well, he was in the Princeton. No, not Jeff Bezos. Let's see. Pick a company. Uber. They were in an incubator. No. So, like at some point, you'd think someone would go, these incubators are groups of people putting on a show about being an entrepreneur,
right?
But not really creating anything that anybody ever needs to pay for.
Well, and interesting, I made the joke when we first started ours, and we tried to do something serious, we were serious at the time, but, I was saying like we're babies raising babies.
Right.
And it's like that doesn't work out very well.
Right.
I think the first came and went fairly quickly because in 2001, when everything fell apart, the structure of most incubators was not sustainable over a long period of time, and it was like a dinosaur extinction event.
Yeah.
Some asteroid hit, and they all disappeared. I think Idealab hung in there quite some time, but the rest of them were fundamentally unsound because they had zero exits.
Yeah. So when we get to the crash, when it all ends, what were the last dinosaurs of the 90s before it crashes in 1999?
You had some incredibly insane hybrids like Excite at Home.
Yeah, right.
Okay, what was that?
Yeah, what was that?
And they put a lot of money into that.
Yep.
Like at the time, and again, now you get like $500 million seed rounds.
Right.
But back then, if you raised, $15-20 million, that was considered miraculous. And I think they had some insane valuation for that. And they had the brilliant headquarters on the 101. Excite at Home.
Which is now, I think, Stanford Health.
Health, right.
Yeah. There's more old sick people than there are needs for Excites at homes.
Right.
So then we get into the opposite, I guess, of a bubble, is where everybody declares that it's over, right? So this is the world that Friendster came out of. It just the word was everything that could be invented on the internet has been invented. It's over.
Yep.
And that was the early 2000s.
Well, and that was the dawn. That's when Google kind of took a hold. So you had they came in and took over everybody's search because it's like we don't want to be in that business.
Yeah, right.
That's it. It's like I think the analog is waste management, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh, that's hard, dirty, sloggy business.
Yeah.
We don't want that kind of. We're going to go do something sexy and sizzly, and meanwhile they start printing money.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. I think what you had then is the dawn of a few things. First of all, 2001 was the iPod.
Yeah.
So digital music came out, and the iPod was the trigger of quite a few interesting. So the disruption of the entertainment industry, starting with music. And SaaS, remember, people don't realize Salesforce has not been around forever.
Right.
They were still emerging with their no software, and everybody's going like, how could that possibly work? Because if we all recall, we used to buy our software in a box at a store called Computer Land or World or something.
Right. Yeah, so that was the beginning of the whole SaaS thing, and it was they had a logo, a thing that was it said software.
No software, right?
And there was a red slash.
Red slash through it,
software. Right.
Right, and that was the beginning of in earnest. And you know, and you think back and you talk about hype versus no hype, and Salesforce was the only people riding that pony at the time.
Yeah.
So you know, you have this thing where people will go open up pets.com. Come on, let's do this, and then you have something that's real like SaaS, which was very controversial at the time, and people said, "How can this work?" And you know, people won't have that because they want control of their software and all that. You know, build it versus buy it, right? Like, what are you talking about? Like, of course you create your own legacy system and own it. You don't borrow it from somebody else. You know, this is proprietary business knowledge.
Right.
So this concept of, you know, the multi-tenant database and running it on somebody else's server and it was foreign.
Right.
And people were anathema to it. There are still people who don't believe in cloud computing.
Yeah. Well, they may end up being right if we all get hacked.
Well, that too. But I'm just saying that, you know, if there's a belief that it works or it doesn't work, you know, here's something that created eventually won.
Right.
But when it initially came out, was very hard for people to accept.
Right. So then we get to, out of the everything on the internet that's been invented has been invented. And by the way, none of the venture capitalists gave the money back. Like, they kept collecting their fees during this period when everything had been, you know, had been invented, they're not investing. Then we get to the next thing I have is the sort of Cambrian explosion, Friendster, but then all the theories about social networks.
Yes.
And there was a whole by the way, everybody was like convinced that all these theories were correct. Only one of them was right. There was the nobody's ever going to put their real name on the internet theory. That was wrong. There was the there's going to be a social network for everything. So there's going to be like a Mexican social network. And there's going to be
very verticalized.
Canadian one. There's going to be one for polo play and all that. That was wrong.
High schoolers.
Music. There's just like a bunch of these things, and it turned out that the answer was no. You only need one. Like what works for one person works for everyone else, and it's a networks effect business. So, Facebook.
Mm-hmm. And look, you know, and from there, people said like, wow, it's not just that, but we've got to do it virtually too. And then came the birth of Linden Labs, and you had Second Life, right?
Yeah.
How many people were out there in Second Life?
Yep.
And you had there.com, and you had a bunch of others. And you say like, we don't just need social networks. We need social networks where you can interact in another world and maybe actually not even be yourself. Although that was the thing with, you know, MySpace, right? There was a lot of experimentation going on. It's like they had, you know, when you were competing against them at Friendster, you know, and we worked together a little bit. And we had to sell ads, and they said, well, they've got 60 million, you've got 5 million. And I said, like, they have 60 million people on there, and I'm 6 of them.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
You know, like everybody was trying out their new persona, so to speak. And this gets back to Facebook. It's like real people, real face. 100% identifiable. We know who you are.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time, and I think this happens on the internet where people try to map. I think the real world with software. They try to map the real world too hard into it. One example is when the computers first came out and the desktops were visual, and you'd have like your calendar and your to-do list and your clock and that kind of thing. They arranged them on your screen as if it was like your office, like the clock was on the wall, and your notebook had a little wire spiral. And I think everyone kind of went eventually like, you know what? I get that it's not paper. Like, you don't need to show me the wire.
Right.
And so I think with these kind of online worlds, because the social networks played with this a lot. Like, we're getting pitched like, oh, everybody's going to go to Facebook, and you're going to be in this world, and you're going to walk up to your friend and like wave at them. Mm-hmm. And it just turned out that you didn't need all that. Like, I just want to see their new picture, and then I want to text them where I am, but I don't need you to recreate. You know, I get they're not here in my office, so it's fine to just put up the picture, and I'll look at the picture, and we'll be good.
But again, this gets back to the core premise, which is separating the hype from the real value. And you know, the real value of the social network was this connectivity with friends and family. Obviously, that's morphed over the last a few years, but actually, and now is going back to that, right? Going back to the original thing with the changes that Facebook just put in, versus this absolute need to be in that kind of virtual environment. Although the virtual environments have now changed to move where the value is in a gaming and massive multiplayer online gaming, which is more of what it's all about.
Right.
And so maybe the Linden Labs and the theirs of the world help drive that development, but their original core concept, is maybe a little off base.
Yeah, and I don't have any inside information on this. My understanding is that Linden Labs Second Life, which is this virtual world that you go into and you can build like islands and mountains, and it's very advanced.
Yes.
I think it'd be fair to say. I think they're doing really well. Like, I think there's just a group of people who spend so much money on that thing that it's
self-sustaining.
Yeah,
but look at what it's led to. It's led to things like Minecraft, which is immensely popular.
For sure.
And like I said, if you play any MMOG, it's a world of virtual goods, right? So they and even if you take it down to casual games, which is, by the way, another trend that's kind of come and gone. Yes, this idea of buying things and paying real money for success in a virtual world, to give you that kind of dopamine, morphine drip.
Well, this is we're in this stage today where cryptocurrencies become the biggest thing, and oh my God, I have more friends who are now experts in cryptocurrency. So. Yes. This has been around for 6 minutes?
Yeah.
I know more people who know more about the blockchain. Like, I fake like I know about it. Like, I'm really good at it too. I think we're all just kind of faking. We really know what's going on. But everybody who had some little game back in 2008, and that game had some virtual cash in it, now they've rebranded. They're like, oh yeah, we were doing cryptocurrencies in our, Ping the alligator, whatever.
Don't you know that Silicon Valley is the land of revisionist history?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, hey, the victors write history. So
for sure.
So if you've won, it's all based on your brilliance.
Yeah.
And if you lost, it's like that guy didn't know what he was doing.
But that is one of my current favorites. Is people taking their little game from 8 years ago and going, that was early. That was my early work in cryptocurrency. It's like, well, if you were such a genius in cryptocurrency, then you certainly bought 10,000 Bitcoin back when it was worth 90 cents, and you're now worth $400 million, right? Like, well, maybe not.
Like the Winklevosses, we were laughing at them, right?
I never laughed at those guys, man. When those guys got $140 million in Facebook stock, and which is now worth whatever, it's hundreds of millions of dollars in Facebook stock. I was like, you guys aren't well, first of all, you ended up at Harvard. You're rowing for Harvard. You're born I would say third base, but it's more like being born sliding into home plate.
And the ball's in the outfield. Yes.
That's pretty much the Winklevoss brothers. But that they saw Bitcoin. I mean, you got impression. Something's going on with those guys.
So let's jump to 2007, where I think you had something changed everything going forward. And so you talk about hype versus reality, and that's when the Apple came out with the first iPhone.
Yeah.
And, you talk about the law of unintended consequences, and maybe, through Apple's perspective, it was intended, but I think the world of technology changed because suddenly you have things that were happening that never happened before. So context, suddenly became the single most important thing, what you were doing, when you were doing it, how you were doing it. Data, while it was around before, it's like, wow, now we're collecting an incredible amount of interesting data from people that we never had before, based on location, what they do, time of day, search, and aggregated in a way that had never been done before. And the dawn of the app, the app environment, which is going from these heavy desktop-based configurations to light applications that that do nifty little things.
Right. And well, there's also GPS in the phone.
And GPS, right.
And which turns out to be revolutionary. But everybody looks at that, and early on, and so everyone starts developing against this.
Right.
But early on, everybody develops in, I guess, what do they? Very literally, like in other words, they go, "Oh, I'm going to create an app. There's GPS, so I can see where, like, when I'm going to meet somebody, like I can see how far away they are." Mm-hmm. Like, which is a problem that nobody has. Mm-hmm. Like, really, like you don't need to see where your friend is, or the check-in. You know, whenever Foursquare comes out, I guess they're still doing well somehow, but you check into different places, and you can become mayor, which of course was not at all the interesting use of this technology. The interesting use was Waze, where you could look at everybody's GPS and figure out what the traffic was and get better routes for people to get to where they're going.
Well, and if you think about the original concept behind a Foursquare, which is, hey, local bartender or bodega, here's a way to get more customers. And really the brilliance behind that was data, and again, this is, starting off as one thing and going in another direction. But, and I think if you also cut back to GPS and you separate the hype from the reality, remember, 10 years earlier before the phone, like MapQuest is out there, and who was the competition? No, nobody was inventing in GPS.
Yeah.
It was not this crazy thing where there were 40 of them,
right.
and people followed the crowd because it was the technology du jour. It's like, oh no, we need another B2B exchange for the herring industry because somebody needs to disintermediate that. Right. And so here's the valuable technology, which years later is something that everybody almost relies on every day.
Yep.
Versus how many B2B exchanges have you been on today?
Well, and some things are hard, like building a map. Somebody has a global map and sending out cars to go get street views. Like you just can't do that if you're not Google.
Well, ask Apple.
Yeah, or Apple. Yeah.
Ask them about building a map app.
Hey, they can afford it. They can afford their own cars.
Yeah, but that was a little black eye for them, because I remember when I opened up when it first came out, and everybody was giving it a hard time.
Yeah.
That Jackson Square here in San Francisco actually showed it in New Orleans.
Yeah. But they make so much damn money on their phones that there's these enormous businesses that Apple has that they don't. I had a friend who ran podcasting at Apple. It was a couple of people, and there's all these things. It's a huge business, and for Apple, they've got 2 people on it because what do they care? They're going to sell iPhones, whether podcasting is X, Y, or Z. They just don't care. Like that thing is just such a juggernaut.
But look at what it triggered. So now that you have the smartphone and you have, then everybody started doing the apps. And so it triggered this avalanche of useless apps.
Yeah.
For every problem that you could possibly imagine. And some useful, right?
Well, and there were 2 or 3 trends right in this time period, if we're in 2008 or around there, that happened, where enormous amounts of development resources went into them, to the huge benefit of people like companies like Apple, and to the detriment of everyone else. And so everybody built an app. They learned to code, the language that iOS apps were in. And it turns out that if you look at what Apple's intended strategy or accidental strategy is, they don't care that there's millions of apps. All they want is you to have a few essential apps. So if everybody is using Google to search, or if everybody is using Shazam was a music app, they don't care that there's 1,000 Shazam. So they're happy to promote Shazam, as long as Shazam's a well-funded company that's going to build a great app. So for Apple, the long tail of apps isn't a benefit to their users. It's just a testing ground for what the 5 or 10 apps are that make your iPhone indispensable.
And the data plays that out. I mean, everybody downloads, you download new apps, you try them all the time, you delete most of them, or they just stay there dormant.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think the statistics are that, 90% of the app usage is within 10 to 15 specific apps,
I'm
ranging
sure.
from Facebook to Evernote and Google. If you don't count mail and texting and that type of thing, it's all concentrated, but between a bunch. And I think Facebook has at least 3 of them, like Facebook Messenger, Instagram, and Facebook. So that's collective. And Google has YouTube, search. So it's kind of aggregated, and we all know this. But but yet back in 2008, there was this. That was the hype. You got to create an app.
Yeah. Well, and so at the same time, so there's the check-in craze.
Right.
I fell into this one. I started a company that was doing.
I remember. Yeah.
This was such so inevitable that this was the thing. Like, check-ins are gonna be the thing, like being mayor, and it basically got subsumed. It turns out it's a feature on Facebook,
right?
And it's a great feature on Facebook, but it's not an independent company or industry or anything like that. It's just what you do when you go to a show. You take a blurry, crappy picture of the stage that nobody can tell whether it's like, Sting or your friend, and you post it. Yeah. And you go, I'm at the St. Vincent show. Right. That's it. That's all that entire phase was. And there was a Facebook app building phase.
Yes.
Where every, Farmville, was kind of the most.
Thank God that's over.
And I think with this, here's what I think this did, not to be super cynical. At the time, Facebook wasn't completely inevitable. You could have built another social network if you're a young entrepreneur, but you didn't. You wasted all of your time building an app on Facebook. And paying Facebook to promote it.
Well, look, this is one of the things you talked about when you were at Friendster, and probably a day late and a dollar short, which is open API, open architecture. Yeah. And Facebook got there first and built it first, which is what Apple did, right?
Yeah.
They got there first, and and that's why the Apple is still a little bit more popular for developers than the Android platform.
Yeah.
Because people use the apps more in that environment, and I think that's what Facebook did, which is let's make it more usable. But I'm very happy that I'm not getting any more invitations to a Ville or a Crush.
Yeah.
And I guess we have Mark Pincus to thank for all that.
Yeah.
But
oh man, I realized we're in 2008, 2009, but we missed one earlier on.
What?
All right, why don't we pause it there? Like I said, having fun, silly. Hope you're getting a little bit out of it, thinking of your own favorite internet bubbles. This has been the Something About Your podcast. We'll be back with part 2 next time. I'm Kent Lindstrom. Welcome back.